but otherwise I haven't seen anybody else's. So we're going to talk about expectations for that project and ways to tell if you're on the right track. So, all right. So we're going to do each project, just a really brief overview, what the requirements are. This is also going to serve as a review, right? Because the 4 topics that I picked are pretty major concepts for the course. And then we're going to complete the DBA for Module 4, the Earth's Diversity module, which is the last module. And I'll talk a little bit about why we finished now, right? Because I know some people are like, is there not another module? So all projects must include, and I know some of this seems repetitive, right? Really just because I want you to think about detail. So whatever you end up doing, if you build something, you design something, you create a lab, you do a lab that somebody else already has done, that's totally fine, right? But make sure you're doing a very detailed write-up. So what that means is a picture of what you did, right? A physical picture that you took possibly, or a drawing of your design, right? I am not going to know what's in your brain, so you got to get it on the paper, right? And of course, make sure it's your original work. If you do reference somebody else's idea or lab or project, that's totally fine. Just give them credit and say, hey, I decided this lab on this topic was a perfect way to answer the question. The lab was designed by blah, 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 and I edited it slightly or whatever. There needs to be at least 5 vocabulary words. That's from the course, right? These could be any kind of words. When we go through the projects, we'll kind of talk about possibilities for those. A summary of how your model experiment system works, right? This is different than this detailed write-up of your design in terms of this is not a drawing, right, or a picture. This is actually words describing how your system or model or lab works. So just walking through the process. If it's a design, it's especially important that you tell me how it's going to work, right? Because I'm not going to be able to see or know how it would work. And then the next component is a video or a screencast that is at least 2 minutes long of you and your partner showing your design, your lab, etc., and how it works. So you can do a screencast totally on the computer. If you need help with that, let me know, and I'll send you to a few websites where you can do that for free. But you guys have probably seen those on YouTube, like when people play video games and they have their video game happening and they're narrating it, something like that. Or it could be a video you shoot on your phone or computer, right, of your experiment and your project, essentially. And then each person in the group, or if you did it by yourself, are going to reflect, right? What was a challenge? What was one thing you would change? And what was one thing that you enjoyed? So try to really think about one thing you would change, right? That could be something like, you know, I really wish I could have built a real cell with dialysis tubing, but I didn't have time or resources to do that, right? It could be something where like you probably wouldn't have been able to do that in your experiment, but it's something you would have liked to do. So the first option is to design and build a model that shows osmosis and diffusion. So first of all, let's really quickly review what those things are. So if you could take a second to get your chat open, and if we could have some volunteers here tell us what is osmosis and what is diffusion. Oops, if I could spell diffusion, that would help. I know some people are doing this one as their project, so knowing what the words mean in the example is definitely important. Feel free to go back in your notes. Feel free to do a quick Google if you can't remember quite what these words mean, but what are osmosis and diffusion? I love it, Jordan. Osmosis is the diffusion of water. Perfect. It's true. So then we need to know what diffusion means. Osmosis is the diffusion of water through a selectively permeable membrane. Okay, so diffusion. Good, we got a lot of people defining osmosis. What about diffusion? So diffusion technically means when something goes from a high concentration to a low concentration, right? And of course, in this case, we're talking about through a membrane. Jordan gave a great example here of oxygen, right? So diffusion is going to be in reference to basically everything except water. So oxygen, glucose, carbon dioxide, other waste materials moving in and out of the cell. So what this means is that molecules are kind of like people, right? They would rather have their space than be compacted together. So naturally, without you having to do anything, molecules will always want to spread out. Think about when you spray perfume in the air, right? It starts out being right next to you, and then it spreads, and then the whole room can smell it. That's diffusion of perfume molecules. The same thing is going to happen with molecules in a cell, right? If there's a ton of molecules in the cell and none outside, some of those molecules will leave the cell to make it balanced. So both of those are going to be super important in terms of how cells work, right? So that's 2 vocab words already right there. We saw some other ones here. Semi-permeable membrane, that's a vocab word. Selectively passing through. For this project, you probably also want to consider passive and active transport, which really is just describing whether energy has to be used. And that's 5 there already. Of course, you could add other words in there too if you want. So then I wanted to show you guys this video here of this actually happening in real life. So this is going to be osmosis in red onion cells. It happens pretty quickly, so you really got to pay attention. But there's the onion cells, and there they are actually losing water and shrinking. Oops, I was going to try to pause it when it was less blurry. So, see if they show it. It's going back the other way. So here, you see how these boxes, instead of being nice full red boxes, are now like shrunken, shriveled looking cells. So that's basically what happens when water leaves a cell. So that would be osmosis in terms of water exiting the onion cell. And then when we add water back, which I think is what they just did, you can see the droplets of water actually on the slide on the onion cells. The water starts going back into the cells, right, and filling them back out. So that's it happening in real life. Your goal on this project is to actually design a model that shows that. So I also included this video here. We're not going to watch it just because I know not everyone's doing this project, and it's like 10 minutes long. But this is a good video to get inspiration if you haven't started your project yet and you're not sure what to do. This is the lab that I actually took inspiration for to create this project option. The first part of this video shows dialysis tubing, which is essentially mimicking the kidneys in the body. This guy like talks quite a bit, I think, in the beginning. But, well, maybe we'll see it. But it's a tubing that actually mimics what the cell membrane does. So it only lets certain molecules through. And, okay, we'll give up on this. And, oh, there we go. And so he actually talks about a lab in which you create a solution. This is a picture of what the dialysis tubing looks like. It's literally just like tubing. It feels kind of slimy and thin. But anyway, you can use dialysis tubing to model osmosis and diffusion of cell. Of course, other notes, right? You don't have to do a lab for this one. You don't have to use dialysis tubing or a real membrane, right? Models can look super different here. They could be made out of paper, they could be made out of clay, they could be made digitally on the computer of you doing a bunch of different slides showing things moving in and out of the cell, right? So this doesn't have to be a super fancy model. And mostly I want you to focus on osmosis. That's probably the most important process in terms of what we're learning here in this beginning biology course, right? But then, of course, diffusion of glucose in small substances like oxygen is important. Mention both active and passive transport. Okay, so I'm going to do this for every single project, by the way. So if you weren't doing this one, you're kind of like, we're going to the next one. Option 2, design a model to show that cellular respiration and photosynthesis are related or that one of them exists, right? Proving that they're related is pretty hard without fancy technology, but possible. Proving that one of them exists is definitely doable, right? So as a review here, remember the relationship between photosynthesis and respiration. They're inverse equations. So the things that are produced in respiration go into photosynthesis, and the things that are produced in photosynthesis go into respiration, and we get a cycle. So options to demonstrate this, these are 4 possibilities here. Of course, you could do something else if it makes sense to you, but a light versus dark experiment with plants, right? That could be a way to show photosynthesis. This one you're going to need to do for at least 2 weeks. I'm not going to tell you why, but I will tell you that the results will be surprising if you don't do it for 2 weeks. That would show photosynthesis. Talking to plants, this would actually show the relationship. I think I've mentioned this before, but does anyone want to take a guess at why talking to a plant would show the relationship between cellular respiration and photosynthesis? The carbon dioxide, when the oxygen that comes from your voice, when the oxygen, not sure what that means, but the carbon dioxide that comes from your voice, exactly. So when you're speaking, you're exhaling, you're breathing carbon dioxide onto the plants. Your breath lets off carbon dioxide, exactly. So in theory, if you have 2 plants and one of them you talk to a lot, it's getting exposed to more carbon dioxide. It should, in theory, grow more than the other plant that's not getting that treatment, right? So of course that's not going to be a perfect model, but it would show that carbon dioxide is influencing the plant to grow. Another one you could do is you can use yeast, the kind of yeast that you use to bake bread, and you can actually give yeast some sugar and let them go through cellular respiration, and you could put a balloon on top of their bowl or whatever they're in, little tube, and they will actually blow the balloon up because they'll release gas. That's a pretty common lab. So if you Google yeast blowing up a balloon, you'll see 20 variations of that lab, if that's something that you want to do. And then there's also this plant called Elodia. I don't know how hard it is to get here. It could be kind of hard to get, but it's a tiny little leaf, and it's a water-based plant, so you can actually see it release oxygen bubbles in water, right? And so you could design an experiment in which you are growing the Elodia in water and seeing those oxygen bubbles get produced. And that would prove cellular respiration as well. So there's many other ways you could do this, but those are 4 options if you were stuck. Notes: growing a plant is not enough. Why is growing a plant not enough to show that photosynthesis and or cellular respiration are happening? It's too simple, Ariella says. Yeah, not only is it simple, but you would have no way to show what actually made the plant grow, right? Was it sunlight? Was it water? Was it the soil? Right, we're kind of in a different position here because we already know what's making the plant grow, right? So we're like, oh, well, of course, growing the plant will prove this. No, right? There needs to be something else. Exactly. There needs to be another variable. Thank you, Maggie. That's a great suggestion, right? Just growing a plant and you say, cool, look, I grew this plant. Okay, well, we don't really know why the plant grew. So you need to isolate in some way, which is why one of my suggestions was the light versus dark, because then you're sort of isolating light, right? Plants can't do photosynthesis without light, in theory. We have limited tools, right? We're doing this at home. So keep it simple. It doesn't need to be a crazy experiment. Just make sure that there's some way for you to measure this. Is a gas being produced, like the yeast making bubbles, the Alodia leaf making bubbles, is one variable being isolated that you could say is really helping the plant or hurting it, like talking to the plant or sunlight. And then does need to be an experiment, right? In this case, I don't want you to just build a model or draw a picture of how photosynthesis works. That's not really showing the process happening in real life. So for this one, you really do need to do some kind of experiment or physical representation. So if you don't want to do an experiment, you probably don't want to do option 2. Okay, option 3 was to design a biofuel from waste, right? This one's pretty hard. I know it sounds like it wouldn't be that hard. I put some links here. This one I found particularly interesting, an option of a way to make coffee grounds into biofuel, right? So again, this one is going to be a lot of research-based, and you probably will use somebody else's idea. You'll probably use some kind of article to inspire you, and that's totally fine. Just make sure you're keeping track of those sources, right? The problem with this, of course, is this is super vague. It doesn't tell you exactly how to do this. So you would have to do further research. For the biofuel one, you are either designing or you could actually try to make biofuel if you'd like. I put a couple other links here as well for kind of how to do that. And really, of course, you want to think about the applicability to people doing this in their house, right? So you don't want to be like, oh, well, you need this $5,000 machine. No, try to do it in a way that anybody could do it in theory. So a few notes on this one as well, right? You're just designing the system, so your drawing or your digital rendition of what you're doing is super important here, right? You can't just say, well, you're going to take coffee grounds and make biofuel. How are you going to do that, right? What would you need? Of course, you could build it and try to do it yourself if you'd like. So you can use complex materials here because you're designing. However, really think about that, right? You don't want to say, well, you could just buy this $5,000 machine, because then you're not really designing anything. Make your design super detailed so that if I was trying to build it or purchase things to build it, I would know exactly what to do. And then, of course, think about something that uses everyday materials, right? And cite your sources and inspirations. So this project is kind of the most open-ended one because there's a lot of ways you could go here. It is a research-based project. So if you're into researching, you like this engineering concept of designing something that would take waste and make something useful, this would be the perfect one for you. Oops, I put option 3, but it really is option 4. It's not 2 option 3s. Is designing an ecosystem and or building an ecosystem. So this one is a project that I've done many, many times with previous students, and it's actually pretty hard to do because you want to create something that can exist totally in a jar that you would never touch. So you really have to think about having the right balance. Do you have enough producers? Do you have enough consumers? Are the consumers going to be able to reproduce? Are the consumers going to die off? Is that okay? Right? So there's a lot of critical thinking involved in this project. And I thought we could watch this little snippet of this video here. This is somebody just making, they have no sound on it, just going out into nature and actually collecting things to build an ecosystem here. So they're taking soil, rocks. Why they're taking soil from the ground, right, might be to try to get some fungus and bacteria that's naturally found outside. They're putting it in a jar, putting some sticks in there, it looks like. Looks cool. We got some ants. Pretty exciting. How long will they last? Yeah, the thing is, if you do build one of these things, there's a chance that your organisms might die, right? So keep that in mind. So regardless, this is an example of a land terrestrial type ecosystem, right? Notice how simple it is. It's got ladybugs, ants, plants. There must be some water in there to start, but if you really do close off your container, right, that water will evaporate and condense and evaporate and condense, and it'll kind of rain in your ecosystem. So you could also do an aquatic one in water with fish or snails. And if you look on YouTube, there's like 50,000 examples of this to give you some inspiration for kind of how to do that. So notes on this one, you're designing with the option to build, right? So again, focusing on that design, make it really clear, detailed, what exactly are you using? Don't just say, put some rocks. How many rocks? A handful of rocks, 3 cups of rocks, right? Be really specific about how your design is going to be. Keep it simple, right? Ants and ladybugs. We're not putting lions, dogs, anything insane in this ecosystem. It should be very simple organisms in terms of probably primary consumer level. You might have a secondary consumer depending. But yeah, the point is, if you actually did build it, you don't want to be upset because your fish died or your ladybugs died. And then of course, thinking about the balance, right? Do you have enough decomposers? Do you have enough water in there that the water cycle can happen? So really thinking about all the cycles and relationships in an ecosystem. Okay. So I also included a link here to the project descriptions themselves, just in case you haven't checked this out yet. This PowerPoint, of course, will go up into the last module of the course. And just in case, wait a second, where did it go? There it is. I will paste it into the chat as well in case you want to open it right now. But all that stuff that we just talked about is there. There are some more requirements for the ecosystem just to give you some more guidelines. Keep in mind that the project is due January 18th. So that doesn't seem that close right now. That's, you know, in about a month, but that's going to go fast. We have 2 weeks of break, and then we're going to be in January. All your classes are going to be coming to a close, right? So don't wait until January 15th to start the project. That's why I keep talking about it, so that hopefully you're thinking about what you're going to do. We're going to do a gallery walk of our projects, which means we're going to post them into a discussion board in Canvas, and you're going to be able to leave comments and actually look at other people's projects, right? So make sure you have something that you feel comfortable presenting to the group. You don't have to present your whole project if you just want to present your design or you want to present your video, right? That's fine. You will have to turn the whole project into me though, obviously. So keep that in mind. January 18th is going to come up soon. So other things to note about the class, we're pretty much done with the learning, right? I set it up so that by today, if you stayed on pace, you should be totally done with modules 1 through 4. That way, when we come back in January, you're going to have 2.5 weeks to work on your project and to revise your work. So any assignment that you're missing, that you got a low score on, right, you're going to have time to go back and redo those assignments. If you're behind, you're going to have time to go back and catch up. So if you're behind in the class right now, or you're concerned because you're missing like 5 or 6 assignments, you now have a ton of time to redo and make those assignments up, right? You also have time to study for the exam. Our next virtual session is going to be a review session, and that's probably going to be the last one that we have for the class. Of course, I'll be available for questions specifically related to you or your project, right? And I'm happy to give you feedback on your project. If you turn your project in early, I will grade it, and then you can redo it, right? If you got feedback about something that you were missing or that you could do better. So keep that in mind. Okay. The other thing that we're going to do is this DBA. Also, I'm going to pop the code word into the chat right now. So there is an assignment that I just put into Canvas this morning that is the collaboration check-in, virtual session 9. I'm going to paste the PowerPoint and the video in there. But it's just 2 reflection questions and the code word, which module was the hardest for you, and which topics or lessons would you like for me to review. So the review is going to be designed by you guys. If you don't give me any topics, I'm going to pick what I want to review. So please tell me which stuff you want me to go over. It could be something we already went over. It could be something we haven't talked about and you want to hear about. It could be a really specific question, however you're feeling about that. So we're going to do that. And then also this DBA, I will paste into the chat as well. So if you've never done a DBA in the virtual session before, we're all going to go into this Google Doc. And you will see that there are spaces for you to put your name. And then there's the 3 questions that we're going to work on answering. And let's see, we might have to add some more boxes here. So claim a box, make sure that you're not in the same box as someone else. And you can go ahead and start answering the first question if you would like. What is carrying capacity and what influences carrying capacity? So take your time, go in your notes if you need to. You can see what other people are writing, might give you some inspiration. Uh-oh, we got multiple people in boxes over here. Let's see. Insert row. And the doc might have a little glitching going on because we have so many people in it, right? So if that happens, it's fine. Just be patient. You could be thinking about your answer. Two. Ooh. All right, let's see what people are writing. Thank you. Carrying capacity is the number of organisms that can be something. We'll see what happens there. Is the amount of animals that an ecosystem can sustain. Excellent. Jordan, make sure you go back and tell me something that influences that carrying capacity. So an example of something in the ecosystem that would impact how many animals could live. Amount of organisms that can live there without some things, the number of animals that an ecosystem can contain or support. Multiple factors influence carrying capacity, such as the order of the food chain, environmental changes, and species population size. So that's a great answer, right? So really think about those environmental changes, right? Even something as simple as climate can really impact the carrying capacity. Number of groups of animals that an ecosystem contains or has. The environment, how many animals there are. Ooh, influenced by, oh, I thought it said influenced by people. We could influence the carrying capacity, depending, right? Hunting could be something that influences. Also, if we're spreading disease to animals, accidentally, it happens. It's the amount of creatures that can be held in an ecosystem good. This can be affected by climate, environment, food. Food is a big one. Water, right? Even, I know this one seems obvious, but space, right? Each organism needs a certain amount of space to live. So if there's not enough space in an area, that could be a reason for the carrying capacity to be lower. If you finished your carrying capacity question and you gave something that influences it, feel free to move on to the second question, which is a little tricky. If we add a new producer to an ecosystem, what will happen? You might have to think about this one for a minute too. If we add a new producer, what will happen? The answer is not nothing. In case you were thinking, nothing will happen. There will be more food. Well, that's one thing, but what else? These are great. Nice carrying capacity answers from everyone that I've seen so far. People who finished their answer looking good. The amount of food, water. Ooh, I like the beginning of Ariella's answer here. It depends on what that new producer is, I'm guessing, or what it does. It's true. Yeah, so if we add a new, let's see, herbivores or are first-rate consumers? Yeah, usually herbivores are primary consumers. Sometimes it could be omnivores that are primary, right? So they could eat plants and insects or something, or worms possibly, but usually herbivores. It's a great question by Jordan. All right, let's see what we got here from Elizabeth. The balance of the ecosystem will have to realign. Even though it is just one new producing species, it will influence the flow of life in that ecosystem. If you add a new insect to an ecosystem, it will create a new food option for a consumer, and it will help other insects survive because the consumers will have more options. The consumers will have more food options to focus on. Okay. It could throw everything off, Maggie says. Okay, good. I'm glad to hear what you're going to say after that. It would affect the food chain and creates new food for some animals and finds a new animal to eat. Yeah, so it would create new food. That would be a positive, right? If you're having multiple producers to choose from to eat, that's great. It would cause a growth in population. That's definitely true. It would cause those primary consumers to be able to increase their carrying capacity, right? There would be able to be more of them. Well, think about, Ariella, what is a producer? A producer means a plant, right? Or something that's creating its own food. So in this case, it wouldn't be an animal, it would be a plant. But you're right about it does depend on what it is. Because what a lot of people are missing here is that that new producer might not have anything that can eat it. Right? Not all plants are edible to all animals. So it could be a plant that can't be eaten. And what's going to happen then if it has nothing eating it? It's going to grow out of control, right? So sometimes introducing a new producer could be a positive thing. It might add new food, another food source, or it could do the opposite. It could take over the ecosystem because basically it could just grow out of control. It has nothing eating it. So that's something to think about as well. Yeah, so a lot of people zoned in on that positive option, which is more food, but just also think it could be the opposite, which is usually what we see. We call those invasive species, where humans said, oh, it would be so cool if bamboo grew here, let's plant it. And guess what? Nothing eats bamboo in Portland, and it grows out of control. Okay, question 3. I see some people are getting started on. If you're still finishing question 2, take your time. If disease wipes out the primary consumers of an ecosystem, what would happen? again, there's more than one answer here. So feel free to go either way. Could be a good thing or a bad thing. It's kind of hard for a good thing to happen here, but maybe. Ooh, excellent, Bella. Your example of ivy is a great one. That is a huge invasive species, and nothing eats it, right? And you see it everywhere, and it's like impossible to kill. Great, Ariella. Great change there. That looks really good. I like how a lot of people are starting their answer off, restating the question. If disease wipes out a primary consumer, then blah, blah, blah. That's amazing because that means you're actually thinking about what the question means here. Okay, Jordan says the producers might outgrow the carrying capacity for the ecosystem, and the second rate consumers will either die out or migrate to another area. True, right? Those secondary consumers lost their food source of the primary consumer. So they're either going to die or exactly go to somewhere else. Or if they're omnivores, they might be able to eat the producers, right? But still, they're going to lose out on a food source, so their population will definitely be impacted. If the disease takes out the primary consumer, the producer would overpopulate and take over the ecosystem. Yes, excellent. Also a possibility, the producer grows out of control. And I'll answer your question in 1 second, Jordan. If the consumers were wiped out, certain species will overpopulate. If you take away wolves, the deer and rabbits will overpopulate. Good. An example there of what exactly could happen. Disease wipes out the primary consumers. There will be nothing there to keep the producers, I'm guessing, in check or at bay. Good. Population in the prey species. Yeah, some animals would overpopulate. Exactly. And I think really one of the biggest things too is that animals especially are mobile, right? They can move. Plants, it's a lot harder. If something bad happens to them in their ecosystem, they're kind of screwed. They're pretty hardy, right? Plants have survived millions of years, millions of mass extinctions, crazy climate stuff. They know what they're doing. Animals, usually, if it's not working out, they'll just move, right? Why would you stay in an ecosystem that is not good for you? So keep that in mind. Animals they'll migrate. Okay, we got a few people still finishing up. So Jordan says, what do we write when we turn in the DBA in modules? You can just say, I did the DBA during the virtual session, right? Or if you want, you can paste your answers in. Totally up to you. I will be putting in these grades in the afternoon after I finish my other virtual sessions. Okay, and we got a few people still finishing up. These answers are all looking really great, guys. I like that I can see you guys real-time editing, adding in new ideas here as we talk about them. Secondary consumers will have to adapt and or migrate. Great. And so that actually brings us to a great jumping point, right, of what we're going to do in second semester. We're going to talk a lot about ecosystems and populations and evolution together. So we're going to talk about that concept of adapting, what that means, how that would look, how that would work. And we're going to do a lot of math with it. Okay, so continue to edit your answer if you'd like, right? Otherwise, I'm going to be going in this document in a couple hours and adding in grades for you guys for this DBA. Otherwise, do we have anybody having a question? Hopefully this was helpful to kind of hear about the collaboration projects, see sort of ideas or examples. And again, on your check-in assignment in Canvas, please let me know what you want to review, right? It could be like you want to review ecosystems, or it could be like, I don't understand the difference between producer and this, right? So it could be something really specific or a whole module that you're like, I don't know. Just let me know. All right, I got Jordan's question answered. So last call for questions. Okay, well then I'm going to say this is done. Have a great break, everyone. Take time off if you need to, but keep in mind you can always catch up if you're behind or you have some stuff that you need to do, and at least think about your project, right? And email me if you have a hard time. Break starts now. No, it actually starts, at the end of today, right? So all the next 2 weeks we have off. Okay, and of course, most teachers will probably be working. So if you email or have questions, they'll probably get answered, not as quickly as usual, but we'll probably be checking. Okay, so have a great break, everyone. And I will see you in January.